All right, in the last video, we showed you how to draw the political compass, how to label the quadrants with the different ideologies. We talked a little bit about how that gives you terminology to describe people's beliefs on the issues, the people themselves, political parties, or other political institutions. Today, we're going to talk specifically about the definitions. We're going to start with the difference between liberal and conservative, and we're going to try to make that visual. But before we can start, I have to put the compass back up on the board. So bear with me. All right, you can see that I have the compass drawn again on the board, and I've labeled the various quadrants, or at least I've labeled the axes with the political ideologies. So I have liberal and conservative as my economic ideologies, and I have authoritarian and libertarian as my social moral ideologies. Okay, so today we're going to talk specifically about the difference between liberal and conservative. I'm going to take those very complex definitions and give you some visuals to kind of remember liberal from conservative. All right, I'm going to have to put some more information up on the board. So again, bear with me. All right, we're now ready to compare liberal to conservative. And here's the criteria in which we're going to make the comparison. So we have gov, which means government involvement in your economic life. So how do they feel about having the government answer the economic questions? Okay? And then you got change. Okay? How do they feel about change? How do they feel about the status quo? Status quo is just a fancy Latin phrase that means the way the things are right now. Okay? And then pace. And by pace, it's how fast do they want the change to occur if they like the change. And then means. What means are they willing to use to see that change, or that opposite of change, that preservation of the status quo, what means are they willing to use to see that happens? All right, let's start with conservative over here. All right, so let's start with conservative. And we're just going to simply use a plus and minus to give you just a quick visual as to how conservatives feel about these things right here. So let's start off with government involvement in your economic life. You can see that I put a negative sign up here. So that tells us that conservatives, as much as possible, they want government to stay out of their economic lives, okay? And then, so we get to change, all right? And that kind of goes here. So conservatives basically don't like change, all right? If change does need to happen, if change should occur, over here we're going to say like agent of change. Who should be making the change? And if you're a conservative, you don't want government to be instituting the change. So the agent of change should be private businesses and individuals. Okay? It's the market that will tell a conservative whether or not a change needs to occur, not the government. And then your private business would institute the change, or you, a private individual, will institute the change. All right, so status quo then. If conservatives generally are hesitant about change, they're wary about change, how would they feel about the way things are right now? You're right, they feel positive. They think that right now the economy works well for most people. We don't need any government intervention in the economy. Everything is going okay. Right now, if change does need to occur, as for how fast should that change happen? If you're a conservative, you're going to say slow. We want it to be slow. We want it to be regimented so that we can control any, impacts that might occur that we weren't predicting. Okay, so change should happen slow. Now, the means that a conservative is willing to use to preserve the status quo and possibly implement some very slow, regimented change is going to be, they're going to stay within the current system and law. So they're going to use our current system, our government, our presidential federal republic, to preserve the status quo or to implement what they might feel is necessary, regimented, slow change. They're also not willing to break the law to preserve the status quo or to implement that change. They're going to stay within the current system and law. That's conservative. All right, so now that we have a basic understanding of what it means to be conservative, okay, let's talk about what it means to be liberal. So first off, liberals are more willing to accept government involvement in your economic lives. They generally feel that government has a positive role to play in making sure people's wants and needs are met. Well, especially their needs, maybe not so much their wants. Okay? And they look out at the world and they say, how do they feel about change? They feel very positive about change, progressive about change. There's progressive changes that need to occur to make sure that everybody's needs are being met. Okay? Now, and then who's supposed to implement that change? Now, from a liberal, they're much more comfortable with, not in all cases, but they're comfortable with the agent of change, okay, being government itself. They would look out at the economy and say, you know what, the market doesn't fix everything. Sometimes the market itself is the problem, and we need government to step in to make sure that people's needs are being met. Right? So the status quo, the way things are right now, liberals would say, no, it's not good enough. There's changes that need to be made, positive, progressive changes. So they feel negatively about the status quo. Now, the pace is interesting. So you say, okay, so what pace is a liberal comfortable in implementing that change? And you'll note so far, everything seems to be opposite. And that's how it's supposed to be. Conservatives kind of opposite of liberal. However, it doesn't mean that liberals want fast, rapid change. Because whenever we have fast, rapid change, what happens? What occurs? That's right. You get revolution, okay? You get violence happening in the streets. Okay, that's a product of fast, rapid change. Okay, and the liberals aren't comfortable with that. So what we put up here is in relation to slow, what is a pace of change that liberals are comfortable with? And basically what they'd say faster than slow. Okay? They don't want to drag the feet. They want the change to happen. Okay? And they want it to happen as quickly as it possible can without there being destabilization. Okay? Without violence occurring. Now the means, interestingly enough, this is where conservatives and liberals agree. Okay, regardless of what you might have heard in the news, okay, or on various websites or social media, or even from like crazy Uncle Vinny at Thanksgiving dinner or something like that. Conservatives, your true liberals, believe the same thing when it comes to the means. They both believe that you need to stay within the current system and law. So I'll just write that up here. Okay, so liberals are basically saying that that government system we've created, okay, our federal presidential republic, is a good enough tool to see the change happen that they want to have happen. And they're also not necessarily willing to break the law to see the change happen. Now, on both sides here, do not get confused with civil disobedience, okay, where you're willing to break the law to see the law change. The big difference there is that if you engage in civil disobedience, you're willing to accept the consequences. You're willing to go to jail, okay, in order to highlight an unjust law. If down here, so I would say you're still working within the current system and law if you're engaged in civil disobedience. Those people that aren't are trying to actually change the government system, okay? And that's different. That's a different ideology altogether, and we'll talk about that in a different video. All right, so there you have it. There's your visual differences between conservative and liberal. But let's see if you understand this. I'll give you just some quick examples of this. All right, our first example, let's talk about minimum wage. Okay, so minimum wage is the least amount of money that an employer can employ an employee. All right, and somewhere around $10 right now. I don't know exactly, right? But which side, liberal or conservative, would be in favor of increasing the minimum wage?
The left, liberal.
That's right. It would be liberal, okay? Because liberals are more willing to see government involvement in your economic lives, more willing to have government answer the economic question of how much do I have to pay my employees? Okay, so if it's government mandated that we're going to increase the minimum wage, that would be a liberal position, okay? The opposite, the current conservative position says, no, government should not actually be telling me how much to pay my employees. What is going to tell me how much to pay my employees? Well, it's going to be the market. The market is going to tell me if I need to increase the wage of my employees. I'm not going to be able to hire anybody at $10 an hour. I'm going to have to increase it to $12. Then people might start coming to work for me. So it's the private business that actually makes the change and increases the wage, and it's the market that would tell the private business that it needs to happen. Okay, that's one example of the difference between conservative and liberal when we're talking about economic questions. So example number 2 was government's response to the pandemic and the impact that it had on the economy. We had 2 classic responses. We had one end of the spectrum wanting to send stimulus checks out. Okay, basically send money to all the families that have been impacted by the pandemic. Okay, and the other response that we had was, no, what we need to do is cut the payroll taxes, reduce the taxes that the employers have to pay because they're not actually hiring as many people. Okay, so which one, okay, liberal or conservative, basically said, let's send money to families so that they can actually spend that and make sure that the economy's running?
The left, liberal.
That's right. That was a liberal response there. So that's more government involvement in the economy. It's basically the government giving out money to people so that they can spend it in the economy. The other example of the payroll tax, cuts was going to be more of a conservative response. Okay, because you're taking government out of the economy. You say, government's the one that taxes us. And if it's less taxes, that means less government, okay? And that would be more of a conservative response, all in relation to the pandemic's impact on the economy. All right, so that's your difference, your visual difference between liberal and conservative. In the next video, we'll talk about the difference between authoritarian and libertarian. All right, talk to you later. Bye.
Right, conservative.